All right, let's dive in. Picture this, a skyscraper. But make it ancient. Make it one solid piece of carved stone. And cover it in hieroglyphs, older than the Colosseum even. That's an obelisk for you. And the sources you've got lined up for us today, they take us on a wild ride through the whole obelisk obsession.
Yeah, and what's crazy is we're talking obelisks, right? Originating in ancient Egypt, but they're all over the globe now. London, New York, Paris. It's the how and the why they ended up in those places that's really got me hooked.
Right, like the logistics alone. We're talking hundreds of tons of solid stone. Your sources mentioned just how much work went into moving these things, never mind across continents. How'd they even do it?
Massive engineering feat, no pun intended, right? Ramps, rollers, levers, and just pure manpower. Imagine thousands of workers hauling these massive stones inch by inch onto these huge barges.
Mind-boggling. But you're getting at something else, too. It wasn't just about moving big rocks around, was it? There was a purpose.
Oh, absolutely not. Your sources use the words exoteric and esoteric to get at this. On the surface, the public reason, it's art, gifts. But the esoteric meaning, the one underneath, that's where things get interesting.
Okay, so unpack that for us. What were these hidden messages encoded in obelisks showing up in new places?
Power. It boils down to power. But the way they use that power, it shifted over time with different empires. The ancient Egyptians, like the pharaohs behind that Lateran obelisk, they wanted to show divine authority. They weren't just kings, they were god kings. And so moving these massive chunks of basically the sky, that reinforced their image.
And what about, like, Cleopatra's needles? The ones in London and New York now, those were gifts from Egypt, weren't they? Back in the 1800s.
Exactly. But even then, not just simple generosity. Think about it. 19th century peak colonial ambition for Britain, France. Gifting an obelisk, that's a power move, like saying, look at these treasures from a civilization we now control.
It's fascinating how these obelisks were almost like statements of power, across centuries. But it makes me think about the inscriptions on them. Those weren't just decorations, right?
And not at all. We're talking hieroglyphs. Complex system of writing. Historical records, religious beliefs, even boasts from the pharaohs who had them made.
And for the longest time, actually understanding those inscriptions was a huge challenge, right? Like the Rosetta Stone was a big deal, but it still took decades to crack.
Exactly. And that's where your second source dives into this really cool territory. AI is changing the game. We're at the point now where we can teach AI to recognize these ancient scripts, the patterns in them, way faster than humans ever could.
Okay, that sounds like almost sci-fi, though. How does that even work?
So think of it like this. We've got optical character recognition, OCR, you've probably seen it used to scan documents, right, digitize printed text. But we're taking that same idea and applying it to hieroglyphs, cuneiform, these ancient writing systems.
So instead of looking for letters and fonts, it's analyzing these intricate symbols, trying to understand how they go together.
Exactly. But it gets even more interesting. Your source mentions convolutional neural networks, CNNs, being super effective with this.
CNN, sorry, you have to break that one down for me.
Sure. So CNNs, they're a type of AI that excels at image recognition. Think about how, like, Facebook can tag you in a photo. That's often CNNs doing their thing. Now apply that to ancient writing. Those systems analyze the subtle curves, the lines of hieroglyphs. They can pick out individual symbols and how they relate to one another.
So we're not just teaching these AIs to read ancient languages, we're teaching them to, like, see them in a way that we never could. That's wild. But it can't be as easy as, like, feeding a computer a bunch of hieroglyphs and out pops a translation.
Right, you got it. That's where deep learning comes into play. We feed these AI systems massive amounts of data, inscriptions, yes, but also the archaeological context, damaged texts, and they start to learn the patterns, make connections. The more data they process, the better they get at deciphering these scripts.
Like giving a history-obsessed detective, like, a lifetime's worth of case files, and then setting them loose in the biggest museum archive ever.
Mhm.
And it's more than just speed, right? Like, it's about making connections we might have missed otherwise. You mentioned something called multimodal learning in the source.
Yeah.
And that really jumped out at me.
Oh, it's fascinating stuff. Multimodal learning means we're going beyond just the inscription itself. We can give the AI information about where the writing was found, what else was nearby, even how well preserved it is. All those clues an archaeologist would use.
So it's not just the text in a vacuum. It's like seeing that piece of the puzzle in context.
Exactly. Your source even mentioned a case, an inscription on like a broken pottery shard. Initially, no one thought much of it, but the AI, it put that inscription together with the fact that it was in a burial site, the other objects around it, and suddenly, boom, whole new understanding of burial practices from that era.
So it's almost like these AI tools, they're like research assistants for historians,
Hmm.
helping them ask the right questions, uncover things that, our human eyes might just glance over.
Perfect way to put it. And it really drives home this point. History, it's not static. It's not some finished book on a shelf. Every new discovery, every translation, it has the power to change how we see the past.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it, right? We
Mhm.
started with these obelisks, these huge monuments meant to project power, tell a story.
Mhm.
And now we're talking about AI uncovering those stories in ways we couldn't have imagined before.
Quite a journey, yeah. And it makes you wonder, what's next? What stories are still hidden, just waiting for the right technology, the right discovery to bring them to light?
That's something to think about. From towering obelisks to the tiniest inscription, seems like the past always has more to tell us. And with AI lending a hand, who knows what we'll uncover next?